You're listening to Season 10 of Mobile Suit Breakdown, a weekly podcast covering the entirety of sci-fi mega franchise Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979 to today.
This is episode 10.14, Holding Up That Hill, and we're your hosts. I'm Tom, and I'm amazed that Bandai has never tried to make an Escape from Gibraltar aboard the Mass Driver roller coaster experience.
And I'm Nina, new to Victory Gundam, and I'm lucky that I'm going to be Gundam podcasting forever. Mobile Suit Breakdown is made possible by our paying subscribers on Patreon. Thank you all, and special thanks to our newest patrons, The Scout and Lambda. You keep MSB Genki. A brief announcement that we had some minor emergencies come up this week. Nothing that anybody needs to worry about. We're fine. But it does mean that our next episode will be pushed back 1 week. There will be no new episode next week, but we will return as normal the following one.
This week, Victory Episode 14, Gilbraltar Kobo, or The Battle of Gibraltar. The episode was written by Okeya Akira, storyboarded and directed by Sato Ikuro, with Nishimura Nobuyoshi as animation director. And now, the recap. Uso and his companions remain in RT Gibraltar. While Uso, Shakti, and the Shrikes perform last rites for Mahalia, the war in space is heating up. Rogue elements of the Federation Space Forces have launched an attack against the Zanskar Imperial Fleet, and an orbital bombardment satellite called Kailas Gili will soon be in position to strike Gibraltar from above. The imminent arrival of the Kailas Gili weighs heavily on Farah Griffin. She needs some kind of independent achievement here on Earth to prove her value to the Empire, expunge the stain of her failure in Largain, and save both her life and her career. But that means she must act. Chronicle pleads with her to wait just a little while longer. It's still possible to resolve this without bloodshed. But Farah doesn't want to resolve this without bloodshed. She wants the spaceport, now. Chronicle invokes high-minded ideals, but his real concern is the young woman waiting at that very moment in a Gibraltar City hotel, Katajina Luz. While Farah's forces prepare to seize the spaceport, Chronicle races to get Katajina on the next shuttle and off the planet. Suspecting exactly this or something like it, Uso races to the spaceport to check the passenger manifest for the shuttle. There, he encounters Katajina. He warns her that leaving now will be dangerous. It's obvious a battle is about to break out. When she refuses, he offers to drop everything to go with her. He'll protect her, he says. Katajina rebuffs him. Uso is a soldier now, and his duty is to protect Shakti. Uso tries to argue, but Katajina says a few final parting words. Goodbye, Uso. I admire your skill. And then she boards the shuttle. The sound of beam rotors interrupts their parting. A nearby explosion shakes the whole building, and the screaming starts. Another blast shatters the plate glass windows of the departure lobby. The Yellow Jacket attack has begun. RT Gibraltar has no defenses of its own, but the League Militaire races to defend the neutral port and its all-important mass driver. The fighting is intense. The Yellow Jackets have little regard for the safety of the spaceport or its staff, and their forces are augmented by a powerful new test unit, the Memedorza, piloted by Quan Li. As the PCST headquarters building shakes from bomb and beam blasts, Lieutenant Gomez begs for military support, and Old Man Romero tries once more to convince corporate bureaucrat Mandela Soon to allow the League to leave the planet. If they don't leave now, before the Kailas Gili is in position, they may never get another chance. But Mandela would rather die than choose a side. Uso is late to the battle, delayed by his confrontation with Katajina, but enters it with gusto. He is determined that no one else should die today. He's just in time to assist Kate of the Shrike team, who has found herself hard-pressed between the Recaro and the Memedorza. Leaving Kate to handle the new mobile suit, Uso goes after the Frying Pan and its escorts. The shuttle, with Katajina on board, is still trying to launch. As it gradually gains speed, following the mass driver rail through tunnels and across canyons, Katajina is treated to vignettes of battle. Peggy and Connie overcoming Lupe Chino, Junko struggling against Chronicle. Kate holds her own against the Memedorza, but one of Quan Li's projectiles goes wide, and destroys a crucial section of the structure supporting the mass driver. Realizing the danger to the shuttle, Kate throws herself into the gap, using her mobile suit to support the sagging rail. The Memedorza flies into point-blank range, its wicked cat eyes filling the whole of Kate's monitor. How touching, Quan Li says, to see such selfless action. How noble. And then he drives the point of his beam saber into the cockpit of the defenseless mobile suit. Uso knows instantly that something has gone wrong. He feels Kate's last psychic scream and sees that blue demon fire radiating from her scorched cockpit. Rage overtakes him. He abandons the Ricarl and goes straight for the Memedorza. He forgets his saber, discards his rifle, preferring to punch and kick the new suit. The ferocity of this assault overwhelms Quan Li. Uso drives him into the ground, smashing and tearing at the hateful machine. Elsewhere, Marbet manages to clip the Ricarl's engine with Vulcan fire. The mobile armor crashes into the sea, and at Metchet's insistence, Farah ejects in a life pod. With their commander down and the bulk of their forces destroyed, the Bespa attack has failed. But Chronicle's Tomliat remains intact, and more, while everyone else was occupied, he retrieved Farah's capsule and managed to attach his mobile suit to the roof of the departing shuttle. No one is in a position to stop him, and so Chronicle, along with Farah and Katajina, ride the mass driver rail into space. As they transit the upper layers of the atmosphere, they cross paths with an Earth Federation battleship, wrecked in the fight against the Kailas Gilly, falling to Earth. Despite their defeat on the ground, the sight fills Chronicle with pride in the Empire's military might. Down below, though they won the battle, the survivors mourn the loss of yet another friend.
So I want to kick us off today by mentioning, as several of you have pointed out in various places, Earthbound, also known as Mother 2, did not come out until after Victory Gundam had already ended. So Ness's name and the fry pan is merely a humorous coincidence.
Rip to the fry pan, which exits the story this week.
As mobile armors go, it wasn't all that cool.
It lasted a surprisingly long time, but it did not transform. There were no big chicken legs hidden underneath its body so that it could become a medium-sized Zam. And I can't believe a mobile armor built for a crew of 3 only has 1 person's worth of escape pods.
It also had a shockingly large cockpit for just 3 people.
And a reasonably long amount of time passes between when it crashes in the water and when it explodes. So everything about the episode suggests to us that Metchet, heroically sacrificed himself so that Farah could escape in the 1 escape pod or whatever. But he maybe could have gotten out and swum for shore, or, it doesn't actually seem like there was that much time pressure on them.
One other point I wanted to bring up right off the bat is that as I was thinking about what I should research this week, I realized we haven't done any memorials so far this season. And the Shrikes certainly deserve them, but as long as they keep dying 1 a week, as long as we are in Death of the Week mode, I feel like maybe we should hold off and do 1 big Shrike memorial later?
The pace of these Shrike deaths is unsustainable. They are not being given enough time for such interesting characters. And it's starting to feel like twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. It has become clear that any Shrike who gets significant characterization in an episode, other than Junko, is going to die that episode. Every time. Helen, Mahalia, and now Kate, or Kite. The moment you express any opinions about Uso or his relationships with other people, you are doomed. It becomes numbing. To us, at least, if not to Uso.
They're gonna have to make Marbet a Shrike just to fill out their ranks.
Yeah, they're down to just, Peggy, Connie, and Junko now.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's happened over and over again with so little space in between, really from the first moment that Kate gets a scene to herself when she's talking to Uso about how jealous she is that he and Shakti will be together forever, at that moment you ought to know that she's doomed. And then from the moment when she sees the mass driver rail get damaged and goes to hold it up herself, no one in the audience should have had any doubt her demise was imminent. It loses any sense of danger when you know that the worst is going to happen.
I imagine that's how the other Shrikes feel.
Maybe so.
But in this episode, I felt that Kate's death, I never know which one of those to call her, is not part of the story for the tragedy of it in the same way that some other deaths have been. It is there to illustrate yet another emotional, philosophical, social difference between these two sides. That she knows she is likely to die protecting the mass driver and protecting this shuttle, but she considers the mass driver a treasure of all humankind and deserving of protection, even though it puts her at risk.
In that way, the mass driver serves almost like a metaphor for the Earth itself.
And you can see how the mass driver would develop this very important symbolism as sort of synonymous with humanity's entire questing to space, questing to the stars. She is only shocked that her killing is so deliberate. It's not a stray shot or something. It's someone coming up to her very directly, being like, oh, it's very touching how you did this, and now I'm going to kill you.
And telling her that, like saying that to her directly.
And that we as the audience are meant to understand that although it is just Lee saying this, he is representative of the attitude of Zanskar as a whole. That they don't see things in that way. They don't see anything as important for all of humanity. That they don't have that same sense of some things supersede our borders, some things supersede our governments and belong to everyone and are important for their own sake.
Yeah, when Kate decides to hold up the mass driver, at that point, the only hope she has of survival is the faint and ultimately futile hope that the Bespa forces will care enough about the mass driver to respect what she's doing. And they simply don't. At one point, Lupe does say, "How dare you use the mass driver as a shield?" But it's not much of a shield when the Bespa forces don't really care about whether or not they damage it. Quan Li is the most reckless in that regard, and I wonder if, looking back on the Barcelona episode, the Old Man and the Sea episode, there's a line in it where Farah says they're sending in Quan Li's unit in response to this riot. That's a bit excessive. And at the time, it sounded like she meant sending in 3 mobile suits to deal with a riot in the city is excessive, but maybe Quan Li, like, specifically, personally, is a bit of a monster. Maybe he's like that one pilot who looked just like Sabat, where he just really enjoys the act of killing defenseless enemies.
You brought up that the Bespa forces are also trying to avoid damage to the mass driver, but for their part, it seems as though this concern is either political, they're trying to avoid the appearance of attacking a neutral site, neutral group unprovoked, or practical, they're trying to capture the site because they want to use it. They want access to the mass driver, they want to use the shuttles, they want to be able to move their own military equipment and personnel through Gibraltar.
And then there's even another layer on top of that, which is that Farah wants to capture it because she thinks that capturing it before the Kailas Gili is in position will help her to avoid the guillotine. She has a very personal reason to direct this attack.
Right. A success here, right before her trial, might forestall a particularly bad outcome. Whereas we've had both Uso and Kate narrate to us that the mass driver is a treasure of mankind, is an important historical monument, is a hugely valuable piece of still in use infrastructure. Every time they bring it up, it's about its importance to humanity.
Right.
Not its importance to them.
And this doesn't get said explicitly, but beyond being a very useful piece of equipment, the mass driver is also a monument to this incredibly major event in human history, the migration of most of the population into space. Like, it should stand as a monument regardless of whether it still remains intact. And then there's the additional layer that not only does it have a function of sending passengers into space, but it was used to send like goods and equipment and stuff into space. It was used as a lifeline for the colonies and might again someday. The colonies seem to be self-sufficient now, but there could be a crisis. The resources of Earth might be needed up there. And that may be what Vespa is ultimately hoping to use it for, once they have seized Earth so that they can exploit its resources and direct them up into the space colonies. While we're talking about the mass driver, this is sort of related. It has been bugging me for weeks now that they call this RT Gilbraltar, and I didn't know what the RT meant, what it was for. RT is short for artificial. So here we see Cartagena in like a hotel in what appears to be the modern day like city of Gibraltar. The part that the PCST spaceport is on is an artificial like extension of the peninsula that was built out so that they could build the mass driver there, because they felt like for sending stuff from Europe into space, they needed to get as close to the equator as possible, and they wanted it to be, accessible by rail and road essentially from the rest of Europe. So Gibraltar was like as far south, as close to the equator as they could get, while still being accessible.
Interesting. Okay. And reminiscent of, didn't they reclaim a bunch of Tokyo Bay? Didn't they build out a bunch of artificial land?
Yes, I believe they did. And I know that a much more aggressive, like massive scale reclamation of Tokyo Bay is the premise that underlies like Pat Labor, which started coming out in the late 80s and is, I think, still coming out in 1993.
Well, and it's been done in New York. A lot of different cities have artificially extended their landmass for various reasons. But I'm very glad you shared that, because I had also wondered why they say RT Gibraltar.
Yep. It's because it's not Gibraltar. It's RT Gibraltar. Now with 60% more Gibraltar.
Though the episode doesn't focus on it extensively at all, it's not really delved into, we get a few glimpses at a changing political situation.
Yeah. And while the episode may not focus on it, it is right there at the beginning in a quite important sequence. I think this is the first direct view we've had of space. The narrator shows up to tell us what's going on. And it appears to be the case that a unit within the Federation forces has gone rogue, declared itself to be part of or fighting on behalf of the Ligue Militaire. This is the Bagley team, and they have attacked the Imperial fleet of the Zanskar Empire.
Are they rogue?
That is a very good question.
That's never explicitly stated.
But if they've declared themselves to be part of the Ligue Militaire...
But that could be a fig leaf. That could be
absolutely
an attempt to avoid embroiling the entire Federation in the war.
Oh, no, I think this is an attempt to embroil the entire Federation in the war.
Ah, so you think it's a deliberate...
I think it is a deliberate provocation.
Okay.
That's certainly how Pipinida and the Zanskar High Brass seem to have taken it.
Right, but they are primed to think that everyone is against them and ganging up on them. Poor Zanskar. Mm-hmm. Everyone is conspiring against us, and all we did was invade some places.
Why should they be mad at us? They're not the places we invaded.
How is this any of their business?
They're only near the places we invaded.
Zanskar can, of course, identify that the ships being flown are Federation ships. Also, based on what we know of the Ligue Militaire, I wouldn't have expected them to have ships or like much of a presence in space at all, since their focus seems to be defending Earth, Europe.
Well, they're a pretty loose organization. Maybe all you need to do to be part of the Ligue Militaire is say that you're Ligue Militaire. And it does seem like there are discrete Federation garrisons in particular regions or attached to certain colonies that are more or less sympathetic to the resistance. Like, I don't know that this is 100% true. I don't know the source, but it's cited in a ton of the Japanese fan sources for this, that Lieutenant Gomez is from the Irish garrison, and that the Irish garrison of the Federation was especially supportive of the Ligue Militaire. So wherever these Bagleys are from, maybe they're just particularly pro-Ligue Militaire.
It is funny to me that Farah acts so affronted by the idea that these groups are colluding. Like, did you really think you were just going to invade part of the Earth and everyone would let you do it? I mean, yes, clearly, but why did they... anyway.
Because if you feel aggrieved, then you're justified in reacting.
Well,
These perfidious neutrals have been conspiring with the rebels, and therefore we are justified in attacking and seizing their base.
I also have to say, although he certainly made a very charming first impression, What a scummy guy.
Mandela soon.
Oh no, Pippi Needham. Gives Farah all of this information, and she says, what do you want me to do? Or what are you telling me to do? Oh, I'm not telling you to do anything. Just get control of Gibraltar. It's all plausible deniability because he doesn't want to be responsible for her either atrocities or failures. And if he never gives her an order, then he can wash his hands of it and be like, I don't know, Farah's gone rogue. And she knows this. She knows that's what he's doing.
I mean, I don't think he outranks her. Maybe this is just a show of his formality and his respect for the hierarchy of the military. Like, he can't give her orders. He's not her commanding officer. But he can give her information that she might be able to use to help herself. Are we breaking into two camps? You
think Pippi Needham cares what happens to Farah?
I think he... I'm having trouble saying it. I think he does, yeah.
All right, well, either I have imagined him to be much more conniving than he is, or you have imagined him to be much more, like, loyal and good-hearted than he is. And I suppose only time will tell.
That's true. I do know there was a cut plot thread where Pippi Needham was going to be in a relationship with Katajina's mother.
Oh, those loose women. Those loose women and their desire for Bespa officers.
Oh, it's so scandalous.
Really quick, since here we are. There's that brief, somewhat gratuitous shower scene of Katajina.
Somewhat?
Okay, plain old gratuitous. And before that scene, there's a pan of the hotel room, which is subtle, but I took to imply this whole scene as telling us, the audience, that she and Chronicle are sleeping together.
I didn't take it quite that far, but I see how you got there.
There's the hotel room. There's only one bed.
She brightens up so much.
She's so excited.
When she receives that phone call. And then on what I think is a metatextual level, introducing her, and we just said how gratuitous it was, but with that angle in mind, if they were trying to imply that, introducing her in the nude creates the feeling, the air of romantic intimacy.
Yeah.
So we're already sort of primed subconsciously to be thinking that when they do the pan of the hotel. All right, maybe I'm willing to concede that this brief, partially nude scene in the shower actually does matter.
It sort of connects the idea in our minds of her naked and Chronicle.
Yes. Her naked, smiling, receiving Chronicle's telephone call. Yeah, okay. All right, I'm there. I'm signing on board.
It's possible that she has her own room. And it would admittedly be a very subtle way to portray what we're talking about, but I think it's there.
Yeah. I mean, she could have her own room and still be sleeping with Chronicle in it. I went to the trouble of making this list of all the bathing scenes that show up in First Gundam and how each of them is there to, like, serve a purpose, and this one isn't, and I was going to go down the list and explain the purpose each one served, but now that's pointless. No reason to do it.
I spoiled your preparation, and I'm sorry.
I spent like an hour on that.
Did you really?
I mean, not an hour. I spent more time than I should have, apparently.
Well, that can happen.
You know the listeners are going to be demanding a bonus episode where I just talk about all the shower scenes in Gundam, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm astonished that has not already happened.
They didn't know it was an option. They didn't know I had opinions and lists.
Now that we are talking about Katajina and Chronicle, I've brought up this idea previously, but in this episode, it felt like a major theme. The idea of self-delusion, of who's honest with themselves and who isn't and why, and what about.
Okay. I'm intrigued and wish to know more.
To start with, say, Chronicle. Multiple times in this episode, and he's done this before as well, but he's like, shouldn't we try diplomacy? Shouldn't we try talking it out? This is too soon to be blowing up the airport.
He does have that very heroically framed, like, last minute running through the airport to deliver what you think is maybe going to be some kind of clever peace offer, but no, he's just there to say, like, one more time, please surrender before we kill you all.
And his initial protests feel merely naive, but by the end of the episode, you wonder how much he really means it or cares. Because he's there with the shuttle, you know, basically fist pumping in his cockpit about, like, yeah, we're the best. We destroyed that Federation ship. We are the best fighters. Heck yeah.
What if... I'm sorry, I can't think of...
You almost never have to bleep yourself.
I know. I just can't. I was sitting there trying to think of a better word for it that would be podcast appropriate, that would not require us to label the podcast as explicit on Apple. But I can't. So there it is. He's a...
And it makes his earlier protestations ring hollow.
Now, here's the thing. What he cares about in this episode is Katajina getting to space before the attack happens. That's it. He's just trying to delay until she can get on the shuttle and get out of there.
So this is another thing that comes up over and over in this episode. Most people, there's one exception, but most of the characters who are deluding themselves, someone attempts to call them out over it. And they brush it off or ignore it. For instance, Farah says to Chronicle, "This isn't about that woman, is it?"
And he's like, "No, I just have to go somewhere and do something real quick before the attack starts.
And please don't blow anything up in the meantime. Pretty please."
And then he immediately flies to Katajina's hotel, gives her the tickets that Mandela gave him to try to bribe him earlier, and is like, "Get on that shuttle, get out of here."
And even if it weren't for all of that, the fact that he continues to fight for Bespa makes all of his sort of hand-wringing about, shouldn't we be trying diplomacy, seem a bit silly. But you could sort of say, you know, he's in a difficult political and social position. His sister is the queen, after all. If he's been in the military a long time, he's used to that sense of like a discipline and loyalty. He couldn't just quit. I mean, he could, but he probably feels like he can't. But by the end of this episode, it's like, oh no, those convictions aren't as firm as we might have thought from how often you voice them.
What is it about Katajina that makes these men elevate her above all of their other responsibilities and cares?
I don't know, man. I don't. I do not understand it. She's another one, and she's one of the only people who doesn't have anybody to call her out on her nonsense. We finally, because Shakti finally gives it to Uso, learn the full text of the letter that she left for Uso.
How cruel. This isn't really cruel on Shakti's part, but how cruel for Uso now to get like one little bit of hope to cling on to right at the moment when it is furthest away, when Katajina actually has just decided that, nah, she doesn't really want to help the League Militaire anyway.
But did she ever?
Really? Or did she believe that she did?
This is what I'm talking about, man. Self-delusion. She wanted to help Uso, and she did. And in doing so, she winds up helping the League Militaire. But it was never for them, and it was never about them. When she left the letter for Uso, I think she wanted him to think well of her, but I don't actually think she cared much about helping the League Militaire. Or maybe she wanted to feel better about the decision. She wanted to feel like there was a reason for her to go with this man. After her few but pointed judgmental comments about her own mother, she is also running off with a man.
Well, she's not married. She doesn't have kids.
When she tells Uso not to come with her to space, she comes up with all these reasons. Oh, now you're a part of the League Militaire. They're not just going to let you go, and you have to protect Shakti.
And as usual, she's not wrong in the specific things that she says.
But she's saying those things because she doesn't want Uso cramping her style. She's not saying them because she's trying to instill in Uso some sense of responsibility.
It's like a younger brother trying to go with his older sister while she's going out on a date with her boyfriend.
This is another level on which this is really cruel for Uso. He and Chronicle are not behaving that differently towards her. They're both professing this strong desire to protect her, to go out of their way for her, to be willing to go with her to all these like dangerous places or places they shouldn't be going. Chronicle's just older.
He's also a handsome prince.
Uso will probably be handsome when he grows up. You don't know.
Didn't Mandela say that he looked exactly like his dad?
Yeah.
So if we ever do meet Hungerg Evan, we'll know what Uso's going to look like.
And then when to herself, she's like, well, the League Militaire is practically an army now, so I don't want to help them anymore.
God.
So you only wanted to help them because they were the underdogs? Or, I mean, the fact is, I don't believe she ever truly cared about helping them.
Sure. But it is not uncommon to see people who are perfectly happy to support a movement that seems hopeless, a movement that is unable to defend itself. The ultimate underdog. It's easy to condemn someone who is killing defenseless civilians. Once it becomes a real conflict, once the weaker side is actually capable of defending itself, then you have to make a choice. It becomes a decision. You have to evaluate what the two sides are fighting for and how they're fighting.
It's easy for people to love and support a perfect victim.
You know, I think that is part of why Kate's death feels so much more gruesome than either of the other two Shrikes we've lost. Not that the way she dies is any more gory. Having him come right up to her when she's not fighting back, when she can't defend herself, and just executing her. It's the kind of act of villainy that makes you really want to see the villain suffer.
Yeah.
You really want revenge, and a revenge that touches them on a psychological level. You want to see Quan Li humiliated and terrified.
And that's so much of the fuel for Uso's rage when he's fighting. But before we switch over to Uso, one last note about Katagina, but related to this comment. The very people that she now disdains as, well, they're so organized and have so many resources, they've lost my sympathy, saved her life here. And the ones that she has thrown in with almost killed her. She doesn't know that. She may never know it. But them's the facts. I don't know if they're ever going to manage to make Katagina more sympathetic, but it's not looking good.
Maybe she follows the other trajectory.
Uso's self-delusion is elaborate and complicated because it's on a couple of different levels. There is the self-delusion around Katagina.
Do you mean the delusion that he might have a chance with her, or do you mean the delusion that he's not completely obsessed with her?
Both. I mean, he lies to Shakti that he has to go check the shuttle manifests for work. No, he is looking for Katagina.
I do not doubt for a moment that Shakti knew he was lying. She knew. She had to have.
But he didn't force her to stay behind. He keeps saying that he is trying to protect Katagina, but what he's actually trying to do is keep her.
Yeah, protect her from other men.
Then he is ready to abandon everything and everyone to go with her. He doesn't even think about Shakti until Katagina brings her up.
I'm telling you, the boy is down catastrophic. That is a special kind of brain you get when you have the worst kind of crush and also you're 13.
And as a result, he is late to the battle. Odello says to him, "What have you been doing?"
Making mistakes, get off my back. Uso, this is the kind of thing you're going to wake up thinking about in the middle of the night in 15 years.
The other layer is a very common one, and I always come back to, I want to say I first heard this on an episode of House, but I'm sure it's from someone else and from something else, but you cannot believe that everything is your fault unless you also believe you are omnipotent. And this is a comment aimed at an adult. Kids are inherently very selfish and struggle to understand the world from a perspective outside of themselves. And I don't mean selfish just in the wanting things for themselves, but in the sense of things revolving around them. When something bad happens in their sphere, they feel like it's their fault. When something good happens, they feel like maybe it's because of them, Uso heading out to battle saying, "I'm not going to let anyone else die." Obviously, it's important that he go out and fight his best, but to some degree, who dies and how many people die is so beyond his control.
Even though he's the special boy, the chosen Gundam pilot?
And his final conversation with Junko, she really calls him out on this in a way that he needs to hear in this moment. He really, at first it can seem a little mean, but it's no, this is actually really important and good that he hear this from someone who cares about him. Because she tells him, well, first he says, "I killed Kite," like it's his fault. And she says, "This woman was a pro. She was way better than you as a pilot and had tons more experience. You are too young and too green to be talking like this. It's conceited." And then he it's like, oh, you're mad at me. Please don't be mad at me. I did my best. And she says, I know you did your best. That's why I'm telling you to stop beating yourself up.
And she tells him to just cry there as a memorial, which the episode follows what I maybe would call a palindromic structure, where events happen in the first half of the episode, and then a similar event happens in the back half of the episode, and each one reflects things about the other. So at the beginning of the episode, Uso is faced with a choice. He can only protect Katagina or protect Shakti. He has to pick one of those two, and accept that the one he leaves will face danger without him. In the back half of the episode, Uso has to pick between going after the frying pan or staying with Kate to fight the Memedorza. He chooses to go fight the frying pan, and later he thinks that because of that choice, Kate died. So he's going to blame himself for whatever happens to Katagina after this, because he chose Shakti. It wasn't really a choice. There was no way he was going to be allowed to go off with Katagina under those circumstances, but in his mind, I think he thinks he chose one and left the other to fate.
The problem with what you've just described is that Uso doesn't entirely credit the agency of these women in making their own choices.
Well, sure.
Katagina doesn't want his protection, and he and Kate are comrades fighting alongside each other. They will help and protect each other as she would any of the Shrikes on the battlefield, but he's not supposed to offer protection over and above that.
Well, someone was just telling me, I don't remember who, but someone was just telling me that children see the world from a fundamentally selfish perspective.
Absolutely. It's just that he's wrong.
Now that the fighting has gotten more serious, now that people on his own side are dying regularly in combat, Uso is faced with greater stakes, more consequences for every decision he makes. He's never been faced with that before. Until a few months ago, he had never made a life or death decision, and now he basically doesn't make any decisions that aren't life or death. So it's natural for him to be struggling a bit with this, and I hope that Junko's message will get into his heart. The other palindrome in this episode is that it opens with the funeral service for Mahalia and the Vespa pilots who were killed, and then it closes with Kate's mobile suit, her Gunneezy, still standing there inside the masked driver, inside this monument to all of humanity. It has become an integral part of the masked driver. The mobile suit is a monument to Kate. And Junko tells Uso, just cry in your cockpit until you feel better. Let that be your memorial for her. Because respect is the only thing we can give the dead, and honor is the only thing we can deny them.
And the knowledge that you cared for them, that you miss them now that they're gone.
And don't you dare imply that she was not a mighty warrior. Don't you dare suggest that she needed you to protect her. That is how we honor her. Just like applying makeup was the way to honor Mahalia.
The funeral is brief, but is so lovely. And a couple of things stood out to me about it. The act of the Shrikes having to lift up the kids so that they can see into the coffin and put little dabs of lipstick on Mahalia. The show wants us to remember frequently that they are children, that they are young children. Seeing them with their legs dangling while they're held in the air. And then the scene at the end where Uso is curled in the chair of his cockpit, a chair that the adult women Shrikes fill out, really, but he can curl up in the seat of it because he's little. And Junko mentions when someone is saying, oh, funeral alongside Vespa pilots, Mahalia's going to roll over in her grave. Junko replies that, well, they can all complain about it in heaven. There's an almost Valhalla-esque tone to it of they were our enemies, but they died fighting. And they're all together in the afterlife now, in what she thinks is heaven. There's less of a grudge from Junko.
It is a testament to the skill of the team behind Victory that they are able to imbue each of the Shrikes with so much characterization given so little time and so few scenes in which to do it. Now, It may be an indictment of the planning of the series, of the story development, that they are being given so little time to work with here. But that has kind of been the case for a lot of the Tomino projects we've covered so far. Moment-to-moment brilliance, but some planning issues.
I'm just waiting for the battle when Lupe ejects the moment another suit shoots at her.
Right? Again, 3 times as a pattern, and every time Lupe has lasted, I think, for less time in battle before needing to eject.
She barely made an appearance this time before it was like, oh, gotta go.
Eventually, it's just going to be her escape pod zooming across the screen. Oh, I guess Lupe was here. Is Quan Li still alive? Because Uso really went to town on the Memedorza, but the last we actually saw of him was him, like, ripping the armored protector off of the cockpit. So, did Quan Li escape? Has he been captured? Is he just going to disappear off screen like Gary Tan and never be seen again? Sorry, Gary Tan.
I have no idea. The other person who I felt was like very self-deluded in this episode was Mandela,
Oh my
but
God.
we don't have to. Do you want to talk about that? Because I feel like we've talked a lot, but...
Briefly.
Okay.
Mandela has this idea that, like, if they do the right token gestures, if they follow the rules, they will be able to maintain their neutrality, as though neutrality were like a trait you could get in a video game by doing the right actions and avoiding the wrong actions, and you would activate neutrality shield or something.
Or he's willing to die to preserve the appearance of neutrality.
Ugh, what a corporate warrior.
But yeah, in case it wasn't already clear to him, Zanskar thinks he's in league with the Federation. They already don't believe he's neutral. And because that is useful for them, they probably won't believe that he's neutral unless he, like, turns around and attacks the Federation.
I mean, his attitude is very similar to Katagina's. Looking at the Ligue Militaire, seeing an army, he doesn't want to help either of these two armies. Vespa and the Ligue Militaire, these two things are exactly identical because they both have mobile suits.
I don't know that they were trying to make this specific connection, but when Kate tells Shakti that she's lucky that she and Uso will probably be together their whole lives, even unto death, it kind of harkens back to the way Uso keeps fixating on all these age-inappropriate women, whereas Shakti is one of the few people in his life who actually needs and wants his protection and whom it kind of, like, makes sense for him to give it to. And
He's just not interested.
Not into it. He acknowledges it as a duty, as something he's supposed to do, but doesn't show any particular personal interest. And it may well be that part of why Kate was willing to risk herself is because one of the hardest parts of grieving is having to go on living without the person you cared about.
She did seem very deeply affected by the loss of Mahalia. Shakti has that line about, Uso, I can't go into space, after he tries to offer her one of the tickets that his mom left behind. And, Shakti, I have bad news for you. Have you seen the opening animation for this show? It's mostly in space. I think you might be going there.
Tom, she can't plant fireweed in space.
Yes, she can. They've got colonies up there. They've got agridomes. Also, Uso confirmed a new type in this episode. He feels the death. He sees the, like, psychic fire. No question about it.
The ghostly emanations from the Guneezy.
Did you know Mandela Soon's last name is identical to Kiara Soon's? Could they be related?
Isn't Lala also Soon?
Lala is Soon short oo. Kiara and Mandela are both Soon long oo sound. There's as much evidence for this as there is for the Uso is secretly Char's grandchild scenario. Clearly, Victory takes place in the timeline from the Double Zeta novels, where Kiara survives and runs off with Gotten, who also survives. And so they must have gotten together, and Mandela is like their kid or grandkid or something.
And after hearing their horror stories of their own experience in war, has a really deep commitment to neutrality.
No, I bet Gotten and Kiara told a lot of really great stories, but they were so weird, he wanted nothing to do with them. He wanted to be the complete opposite. Joining the PCST and becoming neutral is his act of rebellion. And now, Nina's research on Gibraltar.
For episodes now, characters in Victory Gundam have been talking about, thinking about, traveling towards, and fighting in and around RT Gibraltar. And, as with so many choices made in Gundam, I wondered, why? What is it about Gibraltar that made it a compelling setting? Located on the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, Gibraltar is a small peninsula itself, just 2.6 square miles, or 6.7 square kilometers. It has 7.5 miles, or 12 kilometers, of shoreline, and at Gibraltar's border with Spain, the isthmus connecting it to the mainland is only 3/4 of a mile, or 1.2 kilometers, across. Gibraltar also lends its name to the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow gap between North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, and to the Bay of Gibraltar, the large natural bay on which the city is situated, though in Spanish the bay is named for the city of Algeciras, which sits across the mouth of the bay from Gibraltar. The peninsula is dominated by the Rock of Gibraltar, a steep limestone mountain 1,398 feet, or 426 meters, tall. The term, the Rock of Gibraltar, can also refer to the mountain as fortress, as military operations there led to the excavation of a vast network of tunnels through the rock, an estimated 34 miles, or 55 kilometers, worth of them, nearly twice the length of its entire road network. With no streams or bodies of fresh water, throughout most of its history, Gibraltar depended on aqueducts, wells in the northern part of the territory, and captured rainwater for drinking water for residents. Nowadays, all its potable water comes from desalination plants, facilities that convert seawater into drinkable water. The lack of drinking water, or other natural resources for that matter, may explain why it was so long before Gibraltar had any permanent settlement, despite its religious and symbolic importance to ancient peoples. The Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Romans used the peninsula's Gorham's Cave as a shrine, and the ancient Greeks and Romans called the Rock of Gibraltar Mons Calpe. It was considered one of the Pillars of Hercules. The pillars marked the ends of the earth, the westernmost limits of civilization. And there is a myth that the Strait of Gibraltar itself was created when, rather than climb over a mountain, Hercules smashed through it, leaving the two pillars on each side and connecting the Mediterranean and Atlantic between them. Despite all this, there is no archaeological evidence that the current city was settled in ancient times, though there were settlements at other locations on the bay. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the area was part of the Visigothic Kingdom of Hispania for nearly 300 years, from 414 until 711 AD. In 710, the Moorish military leader, Tariq ibn Ziyad, raided across the strait from North Africa, returning for a more extensive expedition the next year, thus kicking off the Islamic conquest of Iberia. Hence the rock's Arabic name, Jabal Tariq, or Mount of Tariq, which is the origin of the name Gibraltar. The Almohads, a North African Berber Muslim empire, built the first permanent settlement on the peninsula in 1160, complete with a castle and watchtower, and called it Medinat al-Fath, or City of the Victory. Cough, cough. Some structures from this period still survive today, including a tower, a section of wall, and part of the old baths. From 1237 until 1462, the city was fought over frequently and changed hands multiple times, mostly between the Nasrids, who ruled the Emirate of Granada, the Marinids, a North African sultanate, and the Kingdom of Castile. The settlement gained strategic importance when nearby Algeciras, which had a better natural harbor than Gibraltar but worse defensive capabilities, was destroyed circa 1375. In 1462, Gibraltar was captured by Juan Alonso de Guzman, first Duke of Medina Sidonia, as part of the Reconquista. Over the next 20-ish years, direct ownership changed multiple times, but Gibraltar remained under Spanish control, and was returned to crown control in 1501. Gibraltar's coat of arms, still in use today, was granted by Isabella of Castile, its main feature being a red castle with a gold rope and key hanging from the castle's central gate. Despite its obvious strategic importance and persistent external threats, quote, Gibraltar was neglected by the Spanish crown and its fortifications fell into disrepair. This left it vulnerable to attack by Barbary pirates, who frequently raided the city and kidnapped its inhabitants. It was during the War of Spanish Succession, in 1704, that Anglo-Dutch forces captured Gibraltar, and in order to secure Great Britain's withdrawal from the war, Spain ceded Gibraltar to Great Britain in perpetuity in the Treaty of Utrecht, 1713. For a naval power like Great Britain, this gave them an astonishing level of control over traffic between the Atlantic and Mediterranean. The strait is just 36 miles, not quite 58 kilometers, long, and at its narrowest point is just over 8 miles across, or 13 kilometers. An area very easy to patrol or blockade. British control of the strait effectively cut the Spanish and French navies in half. Spain made several attempts to recapture Gibraltar. The first in 1727, attempting to take advantage of the American War for Independence, and the second, the Great Siege of Gibraltar, which lasted from 1779 until 1783. This is when the first of the rock's tunnels were created. They, quote, served as communication passages between artillery positions and housed guns within embrasures cut into the north face of the rock. The Great Siege was highly destructive, and the town had to be almost completely rebuilt. Much of Gibraltar's architectural character comes from this period, and is largely credited to Giovanni Maria Boschetti, a Milanese stonemason or engineer who arrived in 1784 and designed and built many notable structures in the old town. Chief executive of the Gibraltar Heritage Trust, Claire Montado, described the Old Town Gibraltar's architectural style as, quote, military ordnance style arched doorways, Italianate stucco relief, Genoese shutters, English Regency ironwork balconies, Spanish stained glass, and Georgian sash and casement windows. Gibraltar played a vital role in the Royal Navy's strategy during the Napoleonic Wars and the Crimean War, and its importance increased with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, since it is a choke point on the route from the British Isles to the Suez. During World War II, it served as a base for naval and air operations against the Vichy Navy and provided support for Malta, including sending resupply convoys while Malta was besieged by German and Italian forces. Gibraltar's dry docks were another important asset. They could handle the largest ships sailing at that time. There was a German plan to capture Gibraltar by attacking over land, but it was never implemented because Franco wouldn't allow German troops into Spain. World War II saw the greatest expansion in the rock's tunnels. Quote, the rock was turned into a huge underground fortress, capable of accommodating 16,000 men, along with all the supplies, ammunition, and equipment needed to withstand a prolonged siege. In addition to its own power station, water supply, and hospital, the tunnel complex was augmented by a secret, hidden facility where, in the event of German capture of Gibraltar, a small team could remain hidden, monitoring enemy activity and sharing any intel they gathered via radio. One article I read in the archives for the U.S. Naval Institute mentions tunnels specifically for the protection, storage, and concealment of aircraft. By the 1970s, the range and destructiveness of modern missile systems had made Gibraltar significantly more vulnerable, and so of less strategic military value. But it could still be used as a base from which to block or disrupt passage through the strait. Per one source, the tunneling finally ceased in 1968 when the British Army's last specialist tunneling unit was disbanded. Since then, the tunnels have progressively been turned over to the civilian government of Gibraltar, although a number are still owned by the Ministry of Defense, and some have been sealed off entirely as they are now too dangerous to enter. Gibraltar is now a British overseas territory and has an independent government, its own constitution, and, quote, almost complete internal self-governance. A governor appointed by the Crown oversees its defense and foreign policy. There was a push by Franco's government for the decolonization of Gibraltar, but in a 1967 referendum, Gibraltarians overwhelmingly rejected proposals for Spanish sovereignty, leading Spain to close the border. The border would not fully reopen until 1985, when Spain joined the European Community. A later proposal for shared Spanish and British sovereignty was also rejected by local referendum. It has, off and on, remained a bone of contention between the Spanish and UK governments. Sidebar that this is another thorny problem created by Brexit. that an extremely inconvenient hard border would need to be enforced between Spain and Gibraltar. I say extremely inconvenient because more than half of Gibraltar's current labor force resides in Spain or is non-Gibraltarian. I don't know where things currently stand, but as of March 2023, negotiations to at least keep Gibraltar in the Schengen zone had stalled. To add insult to injury, in a referendum held shortly before the Brexit vote, Gibraltarians voted overwhelmingly in favor of remaining part of the EU. In its internal census, Gibraltarian is its own nationality, separate from British. Since the 1800s, Gibraltar has been settled by people from all around the Mediterranean, and there were additional waves of migration over time. Based on the origins of their surnames, Gibraltarians' ancestry is British, Spanish, primarily Andalusian but with significant Menorcan minority, Italian, mostly Genoese, Portuguese, and Maltese. Per one source, there are also small, representing less than 1% of the population, groups of Moroccans, French, Austrians, Chinese, Japanese, Polish, and Danish extraction. It is predominantly Roman Catholic now, but also has significant Anglican, Muslim, Jewish, and Hindu communities. Though it is falling out of use, Gibraltar has a local dialect, Llanito, which is mostly a mix of Andalusian Spanish and English, with a lot of code switching between the two, and some words taken from other languages, especially Ligurian. With a 2022 estimate putting its population at 32,688 people, Gibraltar is now one of the most densely populated places in the world. And based on a 2012 census, quote, reclaimed land makes up approximately 1/10 of the territory's overall area, but houses over 40% of its population. Since 1973, Gibraltar has been engaged in an ongoing project to construct artificial reefs in its territorial waters. Asterisk here because naturally Spain contests some of those boundaries. As an ecological matter, though, the reefs seem to be working well as a habitat for marine life and have become a popular diving site. A quote-unquote modern airfield, per an article from the 70s, was built mostly on reclaimed land in the old neutral zone between the British and Spanish lines.
Neutral Arty Gibraltar real.
Although that same article says that the 1,800-yard airstrip is often closed to traffic because of heavy crosswinds. The military used to drive Gibraltar's economy, but post-Gulf War cutbacks has had to develop a lot of other industries, and the contemporary economy's biggest sectors are financial services, arguably tax shelters, gambling, both in casinos and as headquarters for online gambling companies, and tourism. Lots of cruises dock there, and lots of tourists visit for duty-free shopping. Approximately half the world's seaborne trade passes through the strait. There's a lot going on here, so I wanted to break down which factors I think could have contributed to Gibraltar's role in the universal century. Number one, its historical and military significance and associations with great battles. 2, the visually striking landscape. 3, the tunnels, both as a fascinating oddity and as a space that was, however briefly, used to store small aircraft. 4, the amount of artificial land. 5, the neutral zone around the border and that the airport happens to be located there. And 6, Gibraltar's political position as a in-between kind of place and the multi-ethnic, multicultural ancestry of its population. We've noted before that Tomino's characters are often of mixed ethnic and national backgrounds. I guess mobile suits just aren't affected by those crosswinds.
Many of the real-world Earth locations featured in Gundam have been these kind of in-between spaces, like Hong Kong, like Northern Ireland.
It gives the locations themselves a special significance, even in a world where, like, nation-states as we know them don't seem to really exist or have significant power or authority.
And it makes sense that the Federation, as like a supranational entity, would have a special connection to these cities that are neither one thing nor the other. If that amalgamation of all nationalities and all ethnicities into a single political entity of the Federation and a single, well, really a bifurcated human species of space noids and earth noids, but if everything is being amalgamated together, then these kind of global cities where everything is already starting to become amalgamated and become like a unique place unto itself, those are an image of the future. Those are the image of the future that the Universal Century is playing with, at least in this time.
Remember, next episode is not this coming week, but the one after. Thank you for your patience, and we hope you enjoy. Next time on episode 10.15, Casarelia, we research and discuss episode 15 of Victory Gundam, and Never Split the Party. Sheer villainy. Well, semi-sheer. Maybe 40 denier. Doing it for the gram. Parting is such sweet sorrow, but I know you'll be alright if you have Haro. Litter kills. Taking care of 2 orphans? That's too much, man. Haro says, safety first. I am the state. Last meal for the condemned. Human torpedo. Marooned. And death before dishonor. Please listen to it.
Mobile Suit Breakdown is written, recorded, and produced by us, Tom and Nina, in scenic New York City, within the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape people, and made possible by listeners like you. The opening track is Wasp by Misha Dioxin. The closing music is Long Way Home by Spinning Ratio. The recap music is Slow by Lloyd Rogers. You can find links to the sources for our research, the music used in the episode, additional information about the Lenape people, and more in the show notes on our website, GundamPodcast.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email hosts@GundamPodcast.com or look for links to our social media accounts on our website. And if you would like to support the show, please share us with your friends, leave a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, or support us financially at GundamPodcast.com/Patreon. You can find links and more ways to help out at GundamPodcast.com/support. Thank you for listening.
Baby. He's the most baby. Uso is also a Gundam baby.
They're all babies from our perspective.
Everybody but Romero.
Well, the whole polycule, which
oh, the Oji-san polycule. I would say we ought to do memorials, or like Shrike memorials, but since they keep dying every episode, I feel like maybe we should wait.
Say that in the talkback, because I wanted to address that this week anyway.
It's never too late to learn to be a person.
How dare you embarrass me in the safe way? In front of the frozen peas.
Alright, I'm ready to be funny.
In the back half of the episode, he has to choose between staying with Kate and fighting the Memedorza
is how it's spelled,
yeah.
Although often when they say it, it sounds as if there's no R. Memedorza.
I love the little detail of Flanders running up and trying to lick Chronicle's face when they see each other again.
They're buddies.
You know that Chronicle and Shakti have a history together because the H fell out of Chronicle's name and Shakti picked it up.
Romero also calls out Chronicle, pointing out that while Chronicle may feel that these situations ought to be handled with diplomacy rather than violence, that's clearly not the position of Zanskar. That's clearly not the position of Vespa. Their actions show that they are willing to use violence to resolve this situation quickly and in their own favor. and he's part of that.